ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. My name is Sam Strong. I'm the Artistic Director of Griffin. Welcome into what sadly is the penultimate event in our Festival of New Writing, but very happily is an Australian Writers Guild Forum entitled Where Are We Playwrights in 2012. One of my approaches to directing new writing is kind of to work with the best writers and get out of their way, so that's certainly the approach that I'll be adopting to tonight. So in a moment I'll be handing over to the convener, Rick Kowalski, but before I do that I just want to say how thrilled we are, of course, to have these writers on our stage in person. Their work is all great, We've been fortunate enough for their work to grace our stage as writers, but I think we've been fortunate enough to get them all here personally. But I want to say also we're incredibly thrilled to be hosting this event for the Australian Writers Guild. As a writers' theatre ourselves, we're really happy to partner with a company that's about the protection and promotion of Australian writers and their stories. We're particularly thrilled to be co-hosting the event with the Australian Writers Guild on their 50th anniversary. It's quite remarkable to think that in 1962 this organisation started with 17 writers of radio plays banding together and now represents 2,800 writers across various mediums. But with no further ado, I'll introduce to you the convener of tonight's panel, Rick Kowalski, who is the creative director. I think I can remember all of this without recourse to my notes, but I'm going to try anyway. He's the creative director of Quail TV, appropriately a writer himself, and also a board member of the Australian Writers Foundation. Rick, thank you.
Thanks everyone. Just a few housekeeping things. If we talk sort of at this level, can everybody hear us sort of up the back, because we haven't got mics? Perfect. Is that cool? Okay. The other thing is obviously, ask the obvious thing, if you have your phone on, that's fine, because you might want to tweet or something, and I'll talk about that in a second. But just make sure that it's not beeping, if you know what I mean. Just have it on buzz or whatever. If you want to tweet during the forum, I'm told you can. There is a hashtag, which is #AWG Forum, all one word. #AWG Forum, or not you. And so the last thing I want to say, housekeeping-wise, is format. I think we might sort of do some I might sort of throw some questions to the panel for a period of time, and then after a period of time, when they talk themselves out, we'll then have questions from the audience, but there'll be plenty of opportunity for you guys to ask questions. With that said, let me introduce everybody. Again, thank you very much to the Griffin Theatre and the Griffin Theatre Festival of New Writing for having us, and to the Australian Writers Guild for putting the event on, and to all of you for coming out on a Friday night. I'm sure you've got lots of other things to do. There's the Sydney Film Festival on, so very nice of you. Let me introduce our playwright guests. Stepping in for an unfortunately ill Vanessa Bates is Jessica Bellamy. Thank you very much, Jessica, for coming in at short notice. Jessica is the Griffin Theatre and Playwriting Australia Associate Playwright for 2011-12, and she's a graduate of NIDA. She has a Diploma of Dramatic Art in Playwriting from NIDA. She won the Rodney Seaborn Playwrights Award in 2011 for a play called Sprout, which premiered at the Old Fitzroy Theatre, and which is going to Melbourne next year. She's got several other plays, include one for young performers called The Fourth of Nature, which was performed in the ACT in 2011. She's also the author of Celebrity Healing, which, among others, was done for Griffin's Griffringe, and is currently under commission for the Canberra Youth Theatre, and in July is doing development with the Arena Theatre Company, which is in Melbourne, I believe. Lally Katz is on my right. Lally Katz is many of you will know, is one of Australia's most exciting, newish playwriting talents. Her latest play was on in Melbourne this year for the Arena Theatre Company. It was a play for children called Star Chaser. Last year she had no less than 3 world premieres: A Golem Story at Malthouse, Neighbourhood Watch at the Belvoir, and Return to Earth at the MTC in Melbourne. She also wrote the Apocalypse Bear trilogy, which was at the MTC and at the Melbourne International Arts Festival in 2009. Her play When the Hunter Returns premiered in Ireland. She wrote the well-known play Goodbye Vaudeville Charlie Mudd, which premiered at the Malthouse and won the Victorian Premier's Literary Award for Drama in 2009. She adapted Frankenstein, which premiered at the Sydney Theatre Company in 2008. She's participated in the National Theatre Program from London in 2009 and was a British Council Realise Your Dreams Award recipient in 2009. She was a Churchill Fellow in 2010, and in 2011 was a writer in residence at Melbourne Uni. And she's also, of course, written for television, most notably the cable series Spirited, starring Claudia Carvin. That's right, isn't it? Tommy Murphy is on my far right, and he, of course, is the author of, among other things, already a classic Australian play. Look how young he is. He's written a classic Australian play, Holding the Man, of course, which was a huge hit all over Australia, but also had productions in New Zealand and San Francisco, open in the West End this year, in London. His adaptation of Garcia Lorca's Blood Wedding is currently on as part of the London 2012 Cultural Olympiad. He also wrote Gwen in Purgatory, which won the WA Premier's Award for Best Play last year. He wrote Strangers in Between, Saturn's Return for the Sydney Theatre Company, and he is the writer in residence at Belvoir. And finally, immediately to my left, and it's a great privilege for me because I'm a huge fan of his, he's one of Australia's most revered writers in any genre, and of course a beloved playwright, Andrew Bovell. Andrew's most recent play, When the Rain Stops Falling, premiered in Adelaide at the Adelaide Festival of the Arts in 2008, and has been produced in Melbourne and Sydney in 2010, and at the Black Swan in Western Australia in 2011. The play's also done seasons in London and in New York at the Lincoln Centre in 2009-2010, and in Canada at the Short Festival in 2011. His many other plays, as you would know, include Holy Day, Who's Afraid of the Working Class, Speaking in Tongues. Currently he's working on a joint commission for Steppenwolf in Chicago and the National Theatre in London, and he's adapting Kate Grenville's book The Secret River for the Sydney Theatre Company. Of course, he's also a very successful screenwriter, Andrew. He is currently finishing off the adaptation of the John le Carré novel A Most Wanted Man, which is being directed by the director Andrew Corbian, starring Philip Seymour Hoffman, which starts shooting very shortly. And his other credits include Edge of Darkness, starring Mel Gibson, Head On, Strictly Ballroom, and a little nothing movie you may or may not have heard of called Lantana. So, with all that said, please welcome our playwriting guests. That's the most talking you'll hear from me tonight. I'm going to throw it over to our panel. Let me just start by asking this question. Let's talk about where do you guys think as a group the state of Australian playwriting is like? Can we start by talking about it sort of qualitatively? What do you think of sort of to the extent you're prepared to talk about it, the quality that you see of new Australian work, and do you see particular themes that are emerging across the new work that you're seeing?
I'll open that. What I notice as a writer now in my late 40s is that there is a very exciting group of writers in their 20s and 30s. So that generation that is coming up, of which these guys are all part of, seems to me to be enormously talented and have a great deal to say. One of my concerns is that perhaps they're not being given the opportunity as big an opportunity to say what they need to say in Australia at the moment.
You mean compared to the opportunity you think you had at that age?
I think so. And that's a partly... What I think we've become is a nation of very good writers of chamber plays. We've been encouraged primarily because of economics, to think small, and we've become very good at writing wonderful 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6-handers. And I think that our artistic directors, our companies need to encourage us now to be more ambitious, to think about epic ideas and to take the risks to try and write those plays. Recently I was in London and working with the National, and their challenge to me, what they said to me was, we don't know who are the writers who will fill our stages, and their stages are the Olivier or what's their other one? Not their small one, their kind of middle. Yeah. So they're kind of saying, who are the writers that are going to replace Tom Stoppard, David Hare, and Carol Churchill? So they are actively encouraging the next generation of writers to think intellectually, formally, conceptually big, to step beyond the chamber. And I'm not sure if that's happening here, or if it is happening, I don't know where it is happening.
What do you guys think about that? Do you agree? I mean,
I think that's true. I think that I find that I'm usually encouraged to write for no more than 6 maximum, or it's too expensive put on. And I think that it's sort of, I guess companies feel like with the new Australian work, they feel like often it's too risky to spend that kind of money on doing that bigger production, that they're not sure if audiences or their subscribers will come and see it, and so they usually invest that kind of money on something that has had seasons in, on Broadway or the West End, and so I think without a doubt your skills of it's because it's so different writing something for a small theatre and then writing something for a really big theatre. Even writing something for for the Griffin or for it's significantly different from writing something for upstairs Belvoir, or then for writing something for the Sydney theatre. Like it's very hard to know how words sound in the different atmosphere, or what a human shape is like or something. So I guess if we're not sort of, I guess it's like if you're a fish and you're not getting moved to bigger things, you stay smaller.
Do you? Sorry, Tom, were you about to say something?
No, what were you asked?
I was going to ask this, which is, let me put the question a different way. Have you experienced voicing an aspiration to theatre companies to do sort of plays on a bigger scale and been discouraged from doing that, as well as just being encouraged to do sort of smaller scale things? I mean, do you have aspirations to do the sort of larger scale plays that we're talking about, and have you felt discouraged to do that?
The encouragement is an economic one, and the possibilities of that play then touring. I think that is something that encourages you to write with those economics in mind, if you want the play to have a life. I think that is one of the problems at the moment, that it's not easy for a new work to have an ongoing life. I think part of that might be the 12-month seasons that we have in Australia, that not all countries work like that, and I think that makes it really hard for theatre companies to be responsive in several ways. It's hard for a company in one city to respond to a play and grab it and put it on with that cast and shift that production quickly. So we don't have that culture of transfer, which I think is not a good thing for new writing. And then there's the other part of being responsive to what's going on in the world. If you had 3-month seasons, you could say, that play that we're thinking of about Rupert Murdoch or Syria or whatever's happening in the news, you respond quickly and get it to the stage. So I think that's kind of problematic.
How does our 12-month, for some of the more possibly the more uninitiated among us, how does that 12-month season in Australia, as you described it, compare? Can you talk a bit more specifically about how does that compare with?
I guess the 3-month thing. There's mostly. I was thinking of London, where the theatre companies that have seasons seem to do a summer season and an autumn season, right, so that they can be more responsive. And obviously, that's a very different circumstances where the companies aren't as reliant on the subscriber base in the same manner that we are here.
What about the other point that Andrew made, which is the point about opportunity? How do you guys feel, perhaps the 3 younger playwrights on the panel, about this question of the availability of opportunity to do new work? What do you think is the status of that? What's the state of that at the moment?
Oh, well, I mean, I guess it's like personally the past few years I've been really fortunate, and I've done a lot of work, so I feel really grateful for that and stuff. But I mean, yeah, I guess I worry a lot about the next generation of writers, and also like our generation and older generations, and where do they, if we don't have enough companies like Griffith that are doing just Australian new works, like where do they go? Because there isn't necessarily slots in the companies. Like there might be 1 or 2 slots for a new play every year at each company maximum, and it's sort of, and I just think it's so important that you see your work up on stage and kind of see, in order. I think that we need to see, it's very hard to learn how to do it if you're not seeing it, I guess.
Do you feel with this? Sorry, but you were going to say.
In the first few years, I do think there's an extent of having to kind of pitch in and do it yourself, and that maybe that's the way of also weeding out if you will have the necessary strength to keep going through what can be a really hard career. And so with my first play, it was the fact that I had to produce it myself and put it on in a smaller theatre than maybe I wanted to, but it ended up getting a good response and was a great learning opportunity, and that was okay. And I was also wanting to add to the discussion before that in terms of questions like scope and size and of staging and cast, I think it does also depend on what playwright you are and what you want to write, and not subscribing to any particular idea of this is what new plays are. And so while for writing for education, I've been able to write for a 18-person cast, that was fun, but at the same time, I don't know if that is the sort of play that I always want to be writing or will want to do for another many few years. So I think there is a degree of individuality in those decisions, but obviously a need for flexibility in being able to have larger casts if we want them.
I get discouraged when I continually go to the big companies who are actually really well resourced, and continually see Shakespeare with casts of 14 and 15 and 16. Now I want to see that, but I also want to see a new Australian work on that scale, a story of our own telling. I want to see. I want to see writers be ambitious enough to claim that, and we can write. You know, it's absolutely crucial that when we begin as writers, that we cut our teeth on really beautifully shaped, small, intense works, and that we continue to write those whenever we want to. But if that's all that's ever produced, how do we step up? How do we kind of, how do we know what it is to manage 12 people on stage, to manage 12 characters? It's very different. It's a craft, and if we don't have the opportunity to do it, we're not going to learn that.
And you want epic stories to be coming from, you know, you want epic Australian stories, like, and you know, you can have a 4-cast play that's epic, but you know, you want there's something about a big cast play that has more potential to be really epic.
Some stories necessitate that scale.
They demand it.
Yeah.
And it's thrilling. That's part of what our theatre delivers, is a sense of spectacle. Now we see great spectacle in our theatre, but we don't see much in our own Australian writing at the moment, it seems to me.
There's no question, just as an observer of sort of playwriting, that the number of new Australian works being put on by main stages has been in decline for a number of years. I think that's fair to say. What do you think accounts for that? Is it as simple as box office? I mean, what do you think that's about? Is it, first of all, is it true? Is my observation true? And if it is, what do you think is driving that?
I don't know if they're actually in decline. I don't know what the numbers would be on that, but certainly it would be, I think, better if they made up a bigger proportion and across a company's season. But it's certainly not because of box office. Because there is an appetite for new work, and that's continually demonstrated that people do want to see local stories.
I guess I was more thinking about, sorry, I didn't mean to be insulting, I wasn't suggesting that these plays don't do well, but there was a perception that there is a better chance of plays that have a strong track record because they're classics or because they've been on in Broadway or West End coming here. That might be the thing which might be driving the new Australian works out. But
yeah, but I think that's something that maybe in film, Australian audiences don't go to Australian films particularly in good numbers often, but in theatre, I don't think that's
You're
true.
right, because to be like, I've always heard for the past few years, oh no, we're worried about, you know, that audiences won't come see a new Australian work, but I've seen new Australian works all the time that have heaps of, like, that are sold out. So
It's not true. The box office figures at the STC are consistently that an Australian work, historically Australian works have done well at the box office. So it's a myth if that's the perception, but I think there's been, both in film and theatre, a move towards wanting to produce known works and not taking risks on unknown works. It's like we've become a market-driven industry. We need to sell the product that we're making because we need audiences. And in order to sell the product, we need to know what the product is. And then there's a tendency then to do towards adaptation in film, for instance, because you know the outcome, you know the experience the audience is going to have. And at the same time, there was that great gutting of the middle level of Australian theatre companies when many companies were cut, maybe the early 90s. Now that middle ground was very embraced new Australian writing. That was the hothouse in which many of us cut our teeth. And their priority was to produce new Australian work. Now we lost that, and it became much more focused on the main companies. Now they all embrace new Australian work to different degrees, but it seems to me what they lack is a clear curatorial approach to programming new Australian work. So it feels random. It's this one here and that one there and maybe this one here, and it all becomes about what the artistic directors like, who's in, who's not in. And I think their aesthetic, their choices need to be informed by something bigger than just personal taste. I mean, and that's what I argue for. So I think there has been a stepping back from new Australian work. Doesn't mean it's not done, but it's not done in a way that, you know, the work speaks to each other. It accumulates. There's a national conversation that can take place in our theatre. And it's particularly difficult because, you know, in England there's London. It all happens there. Not entirely. There's New York. There's such a concentration of that national conversation. Here, we're a very kind of diverse country. What's happening in Melbourne is different to what's happening in Sydney and Adelaide and Perth. And so it's hard to, you know, draw those common threads together.
Another one of the things going on at the moment, which I've noticed again just as an observer of the plays that are being produced, is the rise of what you might sort of call the auteur director, where you have directors either directing their own work or revamping classics. How do you? Sorry, first of all, again, am I right to observe that that's actually a growing trend? Is that happening much, do you think, or is it a one-off? And if it is happening, does it concern you? What do you think about it?
It doesn't concern me at all. I think that there's room for both. And I think that type of theatre is really exciting. And if it's breaking away from our Anglo traditions of a text-based theatre, fine. But as long as it doesn't squash out playwriting as well.
Are you feeling squashed part of it?
I've seen some productions, honestly, that I think would have benefited from the involvement of a playwright.
But just you can't. It's just you can't. I just wonder if you can actually call it new writing, because it's I just wonder if it's there's some of those productions that I love, but I don't think that fills the new writing slots. Like I mean, I'll tell you what. I've done a couple adaptations before, and it's a heck of a lot easier than writing a whole play. So it's kind of like, and I've really enjoyed some of those productions, and I'm happy to keep seeing them. But I just don't think it, like what Tommy said, I just don't think it can take the slot of new writing.
Yeah, look, it's certainly not either or. I don't think any playwright would argue that. But I feel slightly uneasy about the kind of drift to the auteur, that this sense of, because that is what drives our film industry, and as being a screenwriter, it's a very different relation to the way work is made than what I know in the theatre. So I do think, I don't think that the playwriting community is not valuing directorial vision. We beg for directorial vision. But what we want directorial vision to embrace our work. We want the directors who are very exciting to take on our work as well as the other.
The thing is too that some of these adaptations, I mean, they do still come down to quite honest and genuine storytelling, and I think as long as it's not seen as an us or them, that the programming slots that playwrights could have are taken by this, I think there is room for collaboration, and there has been collaboration between auteur directors and new writing. I think it's a matter of what can we actually learn from these productions and integrate them into, like, I really liked what Simon Stone said about through his adaptation of Strange Interlude, it meant that the audience could be engaged for 100% of the time instead of whatever other percent of the time. And while that's obviously controversial for putting in a magazine or whatever, I think it does make you think, well, are there points in my writing where I'm being a bit lazy? Is there something different I could be doing here? And maybe the answer is no, but being self-aware and occasionally critical isn't always a bad thing.
What's your experience been recently? What do you think is the quality of, how to put this question, the quality of directorial involvement in developing your work? What do you think of the quality of it? And a number of you on the panel have worked overseas. How does the development process and the input of directors here differ, if it differs, from your experience overseas? We talk about, to begin with, let's talk about sort of your experience in Australia recently. What's your sense of the quality generally of the input that you get from directors and the relationships that you have?
I've, for the most part, had a really good time and been really dependent on my directors and dependent on those workshops with actors. And my formative time was here at Griffin, and I loved that time because I thought the quality of the nurture and the support structures for the writing was so very good. That's probably something particular to Griffin. I think it stands out for its dedication and understanding of the writing process.
What in particular did you find so helpful? I mean, I imagine a lot of people here are not just regular goers of the theatre, but may well be playwrights themselves. So what specifically did you find so helpful about that process?
I think one of the reasons you become a playwright rather than another type of writer, rather than a novelist or a poet, for example, is that you are sort of a gregarious person and you crave that collaboration. That's why you've chosen a job where you will sit with the audience, be with your community for the reception of the work. But also in building the play, you crave that time with your collaborators. And I had a really stark example of that recently working on this adaptation of Blood Wedding, because so much of the collaboration was done via Skype along the way with my director. I realised what I was missing out on, what I normally have. So when I got there and had 2 weeks with the actors and the director, everything had been held in wait, and there was so much work that was then done, because that is the moment of playwriting. It's not sitting at your laptop. It's finally being that interaction, that collaboration with the actors and the directors. So in that 2 weeks, there was a rush of work and then a new script issue, and I don't think I've ever kind of worked that fast before, because via Skype, I was missing out on all those other parts of playwriting, the incidental conversations as you go and have a cup of coffee, or the time away from the project, reading each other's body language and all of those things. So yeah.
It's kind of changed for me over the years. I remember beginning as a playwright, beginning as a production, with the default position being there's a problem with the play that we have to solve. And everybody pitches in, and you try as the playwright to manage everybody's input, and you try and honour that and respect that, and you're rewriting and and somewhere you lose the play. I've had that experience. I've also had the experience where there's somebody really astute, usually a director, and they have been able to guide me to a better place. But Robin Nevin directed a play of mine once, and I was relatively young. I went into the rehearsal room. It was the Melbourne Theatre Company. I felt like it was the big league. I was quite intimidated. And she walked in on the first day of rehearsal and threw the play down. She said, "This is the play that the playwright has written. This is the play that we're going to do. We're not going to change a word. It's an exquisitely written play, and there's no need to." And I was there already. I was shocked. But what that meant is that all that time and energy and resource went into the production, the acting. And if there were problems with the play, they were good actors. They could solve them on the floor through performance, through whatever. And maybe we made a few little cuts, a few little alterations, but not many. And I know when I worked in London at the Almeida, same thing. Never never was I asked to change anything, and I kind of half thought that I would. And then in New York at the Lincoln Center, such great respect for the document, for the play. And when I'm watching rehearsal and I can see that there is something not working, and I can think, if I just lifted that and changed that and put that there and cut that line, that's really going to help that actor. And when I said that, they all looked at me as like I was from another planet. Like, that is not their practice. That was When the Rain Stops Falling. So it was a play that had been done, and they were going to embrace that. In the end, we did make some changes, but it wasn't assumed that we would.
The default position.
Yeah, and I found that so liberating.
Yeah.
But have you had more of that, what might be called a negative experience, have you had more of that in Australia? Or is it more, you think, a function of the stage you're at in your career?
I think it might be that. I think there's a tendency to assume that there is something wrong with the play. I'm not sure.
But the culture here would be, I think now that even if there is something, we spot something wrong with the play, that we all know what hats we wear and we know whose responsibility it is to solve that problem. So your responsibility as an actor, mine's a playwright, etc. So we kind of know what our jobs are. I think there's a particular kind of etiquette about that.
But it's funny too, because I've done a lot of plays where I would just be rewriting up until opening night, and then the play would open, and you sort of get caught chasing your tail or something, because you go, okay, we'll fix this isn't working, and then you don't realize, but that was holding something else up further on. Yeah, so you end up changing and changing and changing, and then what happens is the play opens, and the actors haven't had a chance to be in it.
Look, I think it's really important for playwrights to hold their work, to be responsible for it, and to be the expert in the room. And I find this also with the film industry, especially the American film industry. If you walk into a room and if you don't have the solutions, a void exists, and 1,000 people will run to fill that void. So as young playwrights too, there's nothing wrong with confidence. There's nothing wrong with belief in your work. Now, of course, there's a balance.
But you don't have that when you're young.
There's a balance between being open and respectful. When you have the opportunity of working with great actors and great directors, you would be crazy not to be open and listening. But don't go in there with your head down thinking, I have a problem and everybody else in this room is going to solve it for me.
What about, this is interesting, you talked about this feeds into another thing that we talked about before we started the panel, which I would like to explore with you guys, which is models of developing work, models of developing your work from the beginning, and how you've experienced those differing in Australia, say, compared with, or even between theatre companies in Australia, compared with your experience in other theatre companies or other theatre companies overseas. So, what's your experience been? How different are the models that you've experienced in Australia and overseas?
I find at the moment there might be a tendency, something of concern I think, is when the theatre companies see their job as selecting plays, that the plays will be mailed in, there's a big pile, we select which ones we want. I don't think that's actually how it can happen, really work in practice. And I don't think that's how it can really happen in a fairly small pool here in Australia. Rather than selection, the job of the theatre company is to cultivate plays. And that right from the beginning, there is a collaboration, so that playwrights are paired to an idea or a director, that the playwright isn't the only one making the first offer. Sometimes that's how it's going to be, that the playwright comes with a draft. But my experience and my favourite projects that I've had have actually been ones where I've had a task, and often ones where that task felt impossible to me, and I was fearful of it, but the director had a vision, and the collaboration begins right from idea formation. And I've loved those projects.
Has that happened more and more as your career has progressed? I mean, early on I imagine you were turning up with a draft and chancing it.
No, they were actually my early experiences, particularly here.
Oh, they were?
At Griffin, and the recent Blood Wedding was that, but actually I think the opportunity for that might be diminishing a little bit, that it seems to be, I wonder if it's more about selection.
About, sorry?
About selecting plays rather than cultivating them. I think there needs to be more cultivation of plays.
What about the rest of you? What's your sort of experience been, and has it changed over time?
I cut my teeth with companies like Melbourne Workers Theatre, Wesley in the Theatre, where you're essentially making the work together in a very collaborative way, and then gradually move to a more traditional kind of way of working. So, you know, I understand collaboration and I really value it. But what was key for me in my development as a writer is a relationship with a company, being a part of the theatre, not apart from it, if you know what I mean. Having a place within the theatre and being valued within that. And so I agree with what Tommy's saying. Theatre companies do best when they have an ongoing relationship with writers, where they can actually develop them from their early work and can see the vision, have the vision to know that this writer has great promise, let's support this writer. And so if they start off writing in Bovell downstairs, there has to be an opportunity when eventually their new play is put on in the main house. Overseas models, working with Steppenwolf at the moment, they're very dramaturgical. But it's all about what would you like, what do you want to say? And what is the best way that we can help you say that? Would you like a workshop? Would you like a reading? Would you like, and because at the moment I'm blogging or, you know, having this great conversation, electronic conversation with the artistic director and the literary manager there, where I'm just sort of trying to articulate my ideas. And that, for me, is a great kind of, a way for me to find out what I want to write about, without them being they're not intervening in any great way. When I'm ready, they will then make the resources of their ensemble available to sit down and do a reading, which is a great way to do it.
How do the rest of you like to work? I'm interested, actually, this feeds into a process question, which I'm interested in just for my own writing, although I don't write for theatre. What process do you prefer when you're developing a new play? I mean, do you like to do what Andrew's talking about doing with Steppenwolf, or do you like to do something else? And what do you do?
Could I add to that, because
Sure.
I was interested in what Andrew was saying, particularly about Melbourne Workers Theatre and those sorts of days. And a great thing about being a resident at the Griffin is a project we just did that kind of made me feel that those sorts of risks and exciting collaborative decisions were being made. And it was, again, a commitment to writers by having an ensemble of writers being part of the company, which is happening in a lot of theatres around New South Wales at least. I'm not sure if it's happening around the country, but Belleville, where Tommy's a resident here, STC and Playwriting Australia, all are having playwrights in residence, which is a really great way of actively supporting them, having them part of programming decisions, and also devising work together. So while we all have our individual projects going on, there's also a piece which we all put together called Lovely Ugly, which was on a couple of nights ago, inspired by the Kenneth Slessor poem about King's Cross, and the whole piece was about King's Cross. And it was a really exciting experience of that feeling of all kind of trooping in together and making something work with very little time and quite a lot of pressure, but in the end, just that feeling of the show must go on, and also within a professional environment, and a lot of very exciting theatre makers all working together. And I don't know if that's related to your second question.
It's a good point. Yeah, those residencies have come from Playwriting Australia via New South Wales government funding. So they're at Belvoir, STC, and
Lobbying from the Guild.
And with lobbying from the Writers Guild. And no, but that is a really practical way of making sure that playwrights understand the processes of theatre companies, because we're in the building, but also so that the company understands what it is to write a play as well.
Yeah, it's really important. And you know, like most of the companies we were talking about before, like Royal Court or all those, they all have resident playwrights, and they're often running workshops for groups of young playwrights or emerging playwrights, and so it feels like, it doesn't feel like their writers are locked out of the building. They kind of, it's important for writers to get to know how, and I guess once you're in the building, you kind of go, oh, there's such and such from publicity and like it's not scary, but if you're not, before you're in that building, it does seem quite scary, and it does seem like you're not you know, you're not allowed in or something.
And it brings up what Tommy was saying, that rather than programming coming from some poor literary manager going through 5,000 scripts and looking for the gem, it's establishing a relationship with companies that actually know what you're capable of, have seen work before, and have an interest in seeing what your next project might be.
I think it's so much rarer that for playwrights to send a play to a company and it get programmed. It's like it'd be like winning the lottery. Companies have to be invested in it. It's like anything. If they paid money, given time, their hearts are in it too, and they're part of the project.
Because they're the experts of what particular types of theatricality work on their stages, what particular stories work on their stages, and also how they knit within their season. So, of course, the plays have to be cultivated by them.
All right, so let's say you've all got a play, you have a relationship with a particular theatre company, you have a play in development. How do you like to develop your work? And does it differ from project to project? How do you like to do it?
Can I talk about When the Rain Stops Falling?
Please,
that was a conversation that began between the director, the designer, and myself about. We began with the notion of extinction. The conversation went on in various forms for about 2 years to 2.5 years. We then took very abstract ideas to a workshop, brought actors, no text. We specifically said, do not bring text into the room, or do not start with text. And we began through improvisation, through the creation of it, through image making, a kind of language, a shared language, but it was as much informed by design, by music, by direction, by acting, by writing. So that we had this wonderful stew that I found incredibly inspiring. But then there came a time that I needed to take the pot and go away and close myself up for 6 months and write the play. And the only person I spoke to during that time was the director, and even then I needed to keep him at an arm's length because I needed to find my head in this stew. But I loved the kind of initial period of exploration. Rather than me, you know, it's about ideas come out of dialogue, ideas come out of collaboration. So it's both for me. I love that process, I love the openness of that, but I also love the very secluded and solitary process of me and the page. And that's how I like to work.
How long did it take you to, having done the workshop, to sort of develop a draft that you were ready to show people, that you thought was a complete draft of the project?
It was a little rushed in the end because we were, had an opening night scheduled. So I had to work faster than maybe I would have liked to. But that play came in a rush. 3 months for one draft. I think we gathered some actors, read it. 3 months for another draft. And then we were in rehearsal. Yeah.
How much did it change out of interest from the various productions that it had in Australia and overseas?
Once it went into production, it changed very little.
Right.
It was again, I mean, the play tended to be embraced. No, we never started from a point that we had to solve something. Right. This was the play that we were doing.
Do you look back at plays you've written before, even this one, and you see it, if you had the occasion to see it, does it hit you that you could have done something very differently, or perhaps should have done something very differently? Or do you never look back?
No, I do look back. I think I do kind of always punish myself with that could have been better, that should have been better. Even coming to see Speaking in Tongues here, Sam did this beautiful production and I was sitting up there going, oh, I could have changed that.
Although I think it's so dangerous to go back and change something you've written in another time, in another head, in another heart, because it's like someone else wrote it, and it's sort of like it's almost like you've just. If I've tried to do it before and it's kind of killed it.
That's true. Every time, for a while there, every time there was a new production of an old play, I would rewrite it.
Yeah.
And I think it was losing something of what it was.
Yeah.
What about the development process of other members of the group? I mean, how does yours differ from what Andrew's described? I'm just interested. I mean, is it interesting to you to talk about, or if it's not?
Oh yeah, no, I mean, look, it's sort of different. It kind of depends. Like, it just always it depends on the company I'm working with, or whether it's something I've initiated myself, or like, I mean, with Neighborhood Watch, that was I mean, that was a great development. I met with Eamon Flack years ago now from Bovell and told him this idea, and he really got it commissioned and stuff, and then I was sort of just away for a long time working on it, or he'd call me every now and then and say, and also Annette Madden, who worked at Bovell, had been a big part of that, and they just kind of call me every now and then and go, hey, how's it going? And usually I'd be on the run and wouldn't take their calls because I'd be panicking, and so then they'd call me on private numbers and and then get in and I go, oh yeah, it's on the way, guys, any day now. So then so finally, like, I gave them something, and then I started from that. After I gave them the first draft, I started working with Simon Stone on it, who was just fantastic. Like, who was like, you know, Simon, like, if his focus is on something, he's obsessed with it, and so I worked really closely with him and Eamon, and I don't know, maybe it's a way I wouldn't work on every play, but for that particular process, I was really happy with working really closely with them, and I trusted their instincts and trusted their ideas about structure and stuff. And then for other things, though, I would be yeah, it depends, because some directors don't want to be that involved, and so you give them a draft and they go, good, and you go, oh, okay, well, good, but yeah. So I guess, and it depends if it's the company's idea for the actual play, and then I'm writing to that idea, or if it's an idea that I bring to them, or yeah.
Tommy, what about you? What's your process? Is it the same from play to play, or does it differ?
No, I think it changes with every play. I'm finding, I was saying to Lally today actually, that I'm finding a tendency to want to find a structure as soon as an idea arrives, and I don't know why that is. If that's a sort of, if it's a maturing or a nervousness, I don't know. But
probably because it's so hard to fix the structure that maybe you want to.
Maybe I just have a different sense of structure now, or it may be just also the fact that each play bounces off the one before it, so that both in the lessons you learn, but also the things that are vastly different that you want to experiment with as well. And recently I've been working on a play that did require a lot of structuring, a lot of planning before its first draft, but that was unusual to me. So I think honestly it's different with every project. Every play brings its own rules of the game.
What about changes in audience? I mean, some of you comparatively haven't been writing for that long, but Andrew, you've been writing for a long time as a playwright. What do you think of the state of, what's your perception of the state of the audience? Do you think theatre audiences in Australia are savvier or more interested in theatre than you've seen them previously? Are they less interested? What's their attention span like? Do you notice any changes there?
For the most part, I think it's really exciting. I feel really energised at the moment as a theatre maker. I think it feels healthy and dynamic, and for a lot of the reasons we've said, it could be much better, and we could be much better, and we could be writing plays that really stop traffic and you know, things can get better. But for the most part, I feel really energised, and a lot of that comes from the audience.
And what in particular about the audience is gets you so excited?
I think there is an undeniable enthusiasm for theatre and for new writing at the moment.
Do you feel the same way? Jessica, what's your experience?
I think there is. I think the main stage companies particularly are getting really good at working out who their audiences are and reaching out and getting new ones and filling their spaces. I feel with independent theatre there's less of that, which is what I know better at this stage of my career, that being less of a I'm a writer. Being less understood and knowing what's out there is sometimes hard to sell. But I think exciting work, if it has a long enough run, and the problem with a lot of work is that it is only on for 3 or 4 weeks in independent spheres, and that in places like Melbourne, I think there are communities that are aware of all the little pop-up venues that are around the place. In here, maybe less so, but I think maybe that's just about time, and that will develop more and more.
And what about you? You playwriting for a long time?
Have audiences changed?
Yeah, are they savvier now? Are they less interested?
I think they're really literate. I think they know what they like and they know what they dislike. I think they're really good at expressing their disappointment in bad work. I think the whole kind of blogging that's going on is really interesting. It's another whole level of discussion around our work that I think is fantastic and makes it a kind of really useful contribution, though it can be a bit confronting sometimes because people really express their dislike if they don't like something. But I think audiences still crave the communal experience of a well-told story, of a visually rich piece of theatre. I think it still kind of excites us and uplifts us. And I know whenever I go to the theatre up in Sydney, which I've been going to a lot, full houses virtually, that's incredibly encouraging. I just want to see more Australian work for those audiences. They want it. They want to see their own lives reflected, not necessarily through naturalism or realism, but they want to see their own country, the stories of their own country. And yeah, so as an audience member myself, I have such a curiosity and a hunger to see new writing, to hear new voices and go, my God, listen to that person, listen to what they're doing. And that's what I look for, as opposed to, I would always choose to go to that as an audience member than a Shakespeare.
You guys really think about this a lot, but what would you like to write that you haven't written yet? Are you writing things at the moment that are things you've never written before? I don't just mean subject matter, but in terms of genre or structure or technique. Does anyone want to talk about what they're working on now or what they would like to do?
Structure is really interesting to me. A bit like Tommy, I like to know the shape that I have to fill with the story, and I do spend a lot of time working out what that shape will be. And I spend a lot of time working out what the temporal plate is. How will time work in this? And I guess I've got pretty fascinated by time as a notion and stories that take place over a big period of time. So the Steppenwolf National Play is an ambitious kind of concept in which it's a two-play commission, and each play wraps around the other like a double helix, so that each play works in its own right, but together they make a bigger story. And what may be the prime focus in one part of the first play may be in the background in another part in the second play. I'm always been really interested in kind of the unexpected connection between people and community. And also my interest tends to be towards the experience of a group of people as opposed to an experience of an individual. So very few of my plays have a central character. They seem to be about a group of people. It could be a family, it could be whatever. And how, I'm interested in how the relationship between them as opposed to an individual experience. So to answer your question, I want to write a really formally ambitious work that tells a story over a 60-year period of American history. That's basically what I've got my teeth into.
This is the Steppenwolf London Theatre Joint Commission.
Yeah, I want it to be big and I want it to be hard. But I want it to be good for the audience.
Hard to write.
Yeah, hard to write.
Not hard to watch.
and you're not hard to watch. But I do want it to be something the audience needs to work. I want to do work that the audiences are leaning forward because they're not quite sure what they're watching. So that the first 20 minutes of When the Rain Stops Falling, people are going, what the fuck? How do all these people relate?
And it's so funny because the
It's a
first
big
time when I read the
risk,
New York Times review of the play, that's exactly what the critics said.
Yeah.
Except the first 20 minutes, I had no idea how it all fit together, and then it all fit together.
Yeah. As long as you're able to deliver that payoff, I guess.
Yeah. What about the rest of the panel? What are you prepared to talk about what you're working on and what you'd like to work on, either in sort of in subject matter terms or in structural terms?
I'm starting to really enjoy collaborating with different forms and artists from different forms. For example, a thing I just saw that I loved was food at Belvoir, and the way that dance and text worked so beautifully together to tell a story in a way that using either form would have been good, but something about that magic was great. So one thing I'm really excited about is telling the story of the really old house that I live in with my different collaborators, including visual artist, performance poet, musician, and curator. And within that, kind of telling little stories that might not be able to be told just in one form.
I think that for a lot of my playwriting, I've drawn on my own experiences, and sometimes that's been enough, but sometimes that's fallen short and caused plays where the stakes are too low. So as a writer, I want to get better at, I think I'll always be drawing on my own sort of experience of the world, but I want to get better at finding, if I have to do that, finding a metaphor for self that means that the stories can be a little bit less limited. I think I want to write a play about very powerful characters. I have the ambition to write a play that sort of chimes a little bit more directly with what we're reading in our newspapers or perceiving about our nation. And I'd like to also, I guess, write a play that's a little bit more epic and spans a lot of time and characters and looks at maybe not only power, but just the sort of way that masculine bully boy power kind of works as well. Because I think sometimes I've been an observer to that in a way that a queer man in Australia can sometimes be. That you're included but also an outsider.
Yeah, interesting. Lally, what about you?
I guess, well, I'm quite interested in doing what Tommy's doing. Yeah.
I've already started.
And also, I think, like, and also, I guess, I'm quite interested in, like, what, I guess our world feels so kind of chaotic and apocalyptic and stuff, which I guess it always has, but I guess maybe at when you're at different, I guess now that I'm in my 30s and I'm kind of, things feel more permanent. Like when I was younger, everything seemed to go so fast or something, and suddenly now I find that I'm so really interested in history and how cycles repeat themselves and how these stories can be told, I guess, through individual characters, and how you can fit the world into characters and situations, and I guess also, this is maybe different to you guys, but as I find as a writer, every few years it's quite helpful, even if you're no good at it, to do something yourself, like to just not have actors or anything and just be with the audience. And I think I really want to do that, to be honest. Like,
You mean perform?
Yeah, I want to perform. And I keep asking directors to cast me, and they keep going, no. But yeah, but every now and then I just think it's so good to be on stage and sort of feel what it's like to speak and to to feel that rhythm you have with other human beings that are in. So yeah, that's what.
That sounds like a night. I have that nightmare. Every time a play's opening night's approaching, I have that nightmare. When I'm on stage, and I know I can't act, and the play's not finished, and it's horrible.
Yeah. I can't act either. But I still want to do it.
If there aren't any more questions, then I think we might have done our dash for now. Let me say a few things. First of all, there are drinks, which they're in the foyer, are they? For which we have to thank the Wine Society, who is one of our sponsors. Thank you to the Griffin Theatre and to the Griffin Festival of New Writing and to the Australian Writers Guild for all their hard work in putting this on, especially to Bridget Kitchen from the Writers Guild and Louis and Sam Strong on behalf of the Griffin Theatre. Thank you all very much for giving up a decent chunk of your Friday night to come to this. And please thank our panellists, Jessica Bellamy, Andrew Bovell, Lally Katz,